Imagine that every answer you receive creates another question. Why is there a tree? Because a seed grew. Why was there a seed? Because another tree produced it. Why was there that tree? Another seed. Keep going, further, further, further. Now make the question larger. Why are there stars? Why is there matter? Why are there laws of physics? Why is there a universe in which seeds, stars, gravity, chemistry, time, and human beings can exist at all? And then somebody answers, because God created it. So you ask the question you were always going to ask. Who created God? That question sounds devastating. But what if following it carefully does not destroy belief in God? What if it actually tells us what God would have to be? Welcome to the Guided Hour, where every journey carries a story and every story carries guidance. Today, we are going to follow one question as far as human reason can take it. Why does anything exist? And if there must ultimately be a God, why should anyone believe that the description of God given by Islam is true? We are going to build the answer as a waterfall. One conclusion will fall into the next. We will not begin with, the Quran says so, therefore it is true. If we are trying to discover whether the Quran is revelation, we cannot begin by assuming the very thing we are trying to establish. So for a while, imagine that we know nothing about religion. No scripture, no mosque, no church, no synagogue, no religious label at all. We have only one thing, reality. Something exists, you exist, I exist. There is a world, there are stars, there is matter, there are events. Even if someone wanted to argue that everything around us is somehow an illusion, the illusion itself would still be something requiring explanation. So our first step is extremely small. Something exists. Now look around. The things we encounter do not seem to contain the complete reason for their own existence. Take a chair. Why does that chair exist? Someone made it. Materials were assembled. Someone designed it. A factory or craftsperson produced it. Remove all of those conditions, and that particular chair would not exist. The chair is dependent. Take a tree. The tree depends upon biological processes, water, nutrients, sunlight, chemistry, its genetic history, and the environment around it. Take a human being. Every one of us depends upon conditions we did not create. You did not decide that the laws of chemistry would work before you were born. You did not manufacture the universe into which you arrived. You did not choose the physical constants of nature. You did not choose to create matter and then place yourself inside it. We arrive inside a system already operating. This kind of thing is sometimes called contingent. Do not worry about the philosophical word. It means something very simple. A contingent thing is something whose existence is not guaranteed simply by what it is. It can exist, but it could have failed to exist. There was nothing logically unavoidable about this particular chair. There was nothing logically unavoidable about this exact tree. There was nothing logically unavoidable about you being born at precisely the moment you were born. Many things had to be a certain way for those realities to occur. So the waterfall begins. Things exist. Many of the things that exist are dependent. And dependent things invite another question. What are they depending on? Now here is where an important distinction appears. We are not merely asking what happened earlier in time. That is one kind of question. We are asking something deeper. What makes the existence of this thing possible right now? Imagine a lamp plugged into an extension cord. The extension cord is plugged into another extension cord. That one is connected to another. You could have 10, 1,000, 1,000,000. Suppose someone says there are infinitely many extension cords. There is still an important question. Is any of them connected to a source of electricity? Because multiplying things that merely transmit power is not the same thing as explaining where the power comes from. The same principle appears with mirrors. Imagine entering a room filled with mirrors. Every mirror contains light. You point to one and ask, where did its light come from? It reflected another mirror. Where did that mirror get its light? Another mirror. Now imagine 1,000 mirrors, or 1,000,000, or an endless sequence. If every mirror only receives light from another mirror, but there is no source of light anywhere, multiplying the mirrors does not create illumination. The mirrors are receivers. What you need is something that is not merely another receiver. That is the idea behind one form of the cosmological argument. It is not simply saying, everything needs a cause. That sentence would immediately create a problem. If everything needs a cause, God would need one too, but that is not the strongest argument. The argument is closer to this. Dependent reality requires an explanation beyond merely pointing toward more dependent reality. And interestingly, the Quran asks a question remarkably close to this structure. It asks whether human beings were created from nothing or whether they created themselves. Those are not decorative words. They present alternatives: nothing, self-creation, or something else. So consider the first possibility. Could absolute nothing produce the universe? Be careful with the word nothing. Sometimes we hear people talk about empty space as though empty space were nothing. But empty space described by physics is not absolute nothing. If it has physical properties, fields, laws, mathematical structure, quantum behavior, or the capacity for events to occur, we are already talking about something. Absolute nothing has no matter, no energy, no space, no time, no laws, no potential, no properties, no hidden machinery, nothing. And once we actually mean nothing, something becomes obvious. Nothing does not make decisions, nothing does not transform, nothing does not possess energy, nothing does not fluctuate. Nothing does not wait. Nothing has no abilities at all, because there is nothing there to have an ability. So, absolute nothing produced everything does not appear to be an explanation. It removes the very ingredients from which an explanation could operate. What about self-creation? Could the universe create itself? Think carefully. For something to create itself, it would somehow need to exist in order to perform the act of creating itself before it existed. It would need to be present and absent in the same explanatory sense. The problem is not merely unusual physics, it is the logic of the statement. You cannot be your own parent in the ordinary causal sense because you would need to exist before the event that produced you. A book cannot write itself into existence before there is a book. A building cannot construct itself before there is a building. Self-creation does not solve our problem, so we continue down the waterfall. Something exists. Dependent things exist. Absolute nothing cannot act as their explanation. A dependent thing cannot simply manufacture its own existence from a state in which it did not exist. So perhaps one dependent thing comes from another dependent thing. That happens constantly. You came from parents. A tree came from a seed. A planet formed through earlier physical processes. A star formed from matter under gravitational conditions. Fine. But now our question returns. Where did those conditions come from, and what explains the entire dependent structure? At this point, someone may say, why does the chain have to stop? Maybe there has always been another thing. That is an intelligent objection, and we should not pretend philosophers have never thought of it. They have debated infinite regresses for centuries. There are different kinds of infinity and different kinds of causal sequence. An infinite sequence of earlier events is not identical to an infinite hierarchy of present dependence. This distinction matters. Suppose, only for the argument, that the universe had no first moment. Imagine there were infinitely many earlier physical events. Would that automatically explain why the entire physical order exists? Not necessarily. An endless history of dependent things could still leave the whole structure dependent. Imagine an infinite row of books, with each book copied from the book immediately before it. That might explain the text found in each individual book by pointing to an earlier copy. But there is still another question. Why is there an entire copying system? Why are there books at all? Where did the informational structure come from? Temporal sequence and ultimate explanation are different questions. This is why some versions of the cosmological argument do not depend upon proving that time itself had a beginning. The Muslim philosopher Ibn Sina developed an argument built around necessary and contingent existence. Much later, other philosophers developed related arguments about sufficient reason. The central intuition is powerful. Even if you had an endlessly long chain of dependent reality, it would still be a chain consisting entirely of things that do not explain their own existence. The number of dependent members does not automatically turn dependence into independence. A billion borrowers do not become the original owner merely because there are many of them. An infinite number of mirrors do not become a lamp simply because the line of mirrors never ends. And now we reach one of the most important moments in the entire journey. If everything were dependent, then everything would ultimately be borrowing existence. Borrowing from what? If the answer is always another borrower, the explanatory task remains unfinished. So the argument proposes that reality must eventually rest upon something fundamentally different, not another contingent object, not another dependent God, not another being waiting for a higher being to switch it on, something whose existence is not borrowed, something that does not receive existence, something that exists necessarily. Necessary existence. That phrase is the hinge of the entire waterfall. It does not mean something that happens to live forever. A being could theoretically live forever and still depend on something else for its existence. Necessary means deeper than long-lasting. It means non-dependent at the most fundamental level. Its existence is not received from something more basic. If it needed a maker, then it would not be the necessary foundation. Its maker would occupy the more fundamental position. And now we can finally answer the question, who created God? If by God we mean a powerful creature inside the universe, then yes, asking what created that creature would be reasonable. If by God we mean a being produced by another God, then the first one was never ultimate. And if that second God was produced by a third, then the second was not ultimate either. Keep going for as long as you wish. You have not explained ultimate reality. You have simply moved the label God from one dependent being to another. The real question is not, who created God? The real question is, does there exist an ultimate reality that is not created because it is not dependent in the first place? If the answer is no, we appear to be left with a universe of borrowers and no ultimate source from which existence is borrowed. If the answer is yes, then we have reached something very different from ordinary objects. Notice what happened. We did not make an exception for God. We changed categories. The principle was never, everything needs a creator except my favorite being. The principle was that contingent, dependent reality requires explanation. If the explanatory foundation were also contingent and dependent, it would not be the foundation. It would simply become another part of the question. This is the first great waterfall. Something exists. Dependent things exist. Dependent reality cannot explain itself merely by pointing endlessly toward more dependency. So reason pushes us toward a non-dependent foundation, a necessary reality. Now something fascinating happens. Once we ask what such a foundation would have to be like, the field begins to narrow. Could the necessary foundation itself be assembled from independently existing pieces? If it depended upon more fundamental pieces to make it what it is, then those pieces would be explanatorily prior. The supposed foundation would again depend on something. Could it be one object among many objects in space, located at one coordinate and not another? Then questions arise about the physical framework in which it exists. Why that location? Why that physical structure? Why that set of limitations? A truly ultimate foundation cannot simply be another ordinary item inside the dependent system it is supposed to explain. This does not allow us to derive every attribute of God in a few sentences. Philosophers disagree about precisely how far these arguments go, but the direction is becoming recognizable, independent, necessary, not merely another physical object, not produced, not borrowing existence. Now ask another question. Could there be two absolutely ultimate necessary beings, or 10, or 1,000? At first that sounds possible. Why should there only be one? So imagine two supposed ultimate realities. Call them A and B. For them genuinely to be two, there must be some distinction between them. Something must be true of A that is not true of B, or there would be no basis for counting them as two. Perhaps A has one domain and B has another, but then each is limited. A does not possess what belongs exclusively to B. Perhaps A controls one part of reality and B controls another. Then neither is the ultimate explanation of the whole. Perhaps they are identical in every possible respect. Then what exactly makes them two ultimate realities rather than one reality being counted twice? This is not a mathematical proof that settles every possible theory of divine plurality, but it creates serious pressure toward unity. An ultimate foundation should not require another principle to explain why ultimate reality is divided into several competing or differentiated centers. And now listen to the Quran. It says that if there had been other gods governing the heavens and earth besides Allah, corruption would follow. Elsewhere, it says that each god would take what it created and some would seek dominance over others. The argument is striking. If multiple gods possess genuinely independent ultimate wills, what guarantees a unified order? If something higher guarantees their harmony, then that higher principle appears more ultimate than they are. If their harmony is necessary because they all share some deeper nature, we may again ask whether that shared necessary reality is the true foundation. The waterfall keeps pulling downward toward one. Now we are getting remarkably close to a theological description, a reality that is necessary, independent, not generated by another being, not one dependent object among other dependent objects, ultimately one, the source upon which everything else depends. And this is where we finally open the Quran, not to assume it is true, but to ask a new question. What kind of God does this book actually describe? Chapter 112 gives one of the shortest answers in the entire Quran. It identifies Allah as one. It describes Allah as the one upon whom others depend while he is not dependent upon them. It denies that Allah was born. It denies that Allah produces divine offspring. And it says that nothing is comparable to him. Stop there, look at the waterfall we built without beginning from scripture. Necessary, independent, ungenerated, one, not another ordinary member of creation. Now look at the Quran's description. One, self-sufficient, not born, nothing comparable to him. The resemblance does not prove that the Quran came from Allah. That would move too quickly, but it means Islam has passed an important first test. The God described by the Quran closely resembles the kind of ultimate foundation our argument was independently approaching. Another Quranic passage describes Allah as the ever-living and the one sustaining everything, while neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes him. Again, notice the concept. Creation depends. The Creator does not become exhausted by maintaining it. The Quran says there is nothing like him. Creator and creation are not the same category. This is Tawheed, not simply believing that there is one really powerful God. Tawheed is much deeper. Ultimate reality belongs to Allah alone. No partner shares his divinity. No parent produced him. No child continues him. No higher reality limits him. No physical object contains him. Everything else is creation. And now the phrase, "who created God," begins to sound different. The Quran is not presenting Allah as the first creature in a very long queue of creatures. It is presenting Allah as the one because of whom the queue exists at all. But we have another issue. Someone may say, fine, maybe there is a necessary foundation. Why does that foundation have to possess anything like will? Why speak about a creator rather than an impersonal metaphysical fact? This question is more difficult. And this is where we should be careful. The bare contingency argument gives us a necessary foundation more directly than it gives us every personal attribute. Additional arguments are needed. One line of reasoning asks about explanation and selection. The physical world contains particular conditions. This universe has this history rather than countless other conceivable histories. If the foundation of reality produced its effect with complete mechanical necessity, philosophers ask why the effect would not simply follow necessarily from the foundation in exactly one unavoidable way. A will can explain selection among possibilities in a way an impersonal mechanical necessity may not. That argument is debated. We should say that clearly, but it helps explain why classical theism does not stop at an abstract equation. And the Quran certainly does not describe ultimate reality as a blind mathematical object. It describes Allah as knowing, willing, creating, commanding, and sustaining. That introduces new claims. Those claims need their own evidence. We will return to Revelation. But first, another popular answer appears. Chance. Maybe everything is just chance. What does that mean? Think about rolling a die. You roll a 6. You might say, it happened by chance. But chance is not a little invisible creature that pushed the die onto 6. The actual event involved a physical die, your hand, movement, gravity, collisions, a table, momentum, and physical conditions. Probability describes uncertainty or the distribution of possible outcomes. It is not normally an additional physical substance producing the event. So when someone says, life came about through chance, we have to ask what they actually mean. Modern origin of life science investigates chemistry, molecules, energy, environments, self-organization, replication, selection, physical processes. Researchers have proposed multiple pathways and continue studying how non-living chemistry could have developed into the earliest living systems. That is a scientific question, and it is important. A Muslim does not need to be frightened by scientists studying it. Suppose tomorrow scientists developed an extraordinarily detailed account of every chemical transition from prebiotic chemistry to the first self-replicating living system. Would Allah disappear? No. Because we would have answered a different question. We would have explained how one physical arrangement changed into another physical arrangement under particular laws and conditions. Our waterfall would immediately ask, where did the chemistry come from? Where did the physical universe come from? Why does a law-governed system exist in which those transformations are possible? The mechanism inside the universe is not identical to the explanation for the universe. When rain falls, meteorology can explain pressure, temperature, water vapor, condensation, and atmospheric dynamics. A scientific explanation of rain does not constitute an argument against Allah. It tells us about the processes operating within creation. Likewise, if abiogenesis becomes much better understood, that would be fascinating science. We should not build faith upon gaps in scientific knowledge, because gaps can shrink. The argument for Allah should not be, scientists do not know this detail, therefore Allah. The argument we are examining is deeper. Even a universe in which every physical process was completely understood would still exist. Its laws would exist. Its fields would exist. Its mathematical relationships would exist. Its history would exist. And the waterfall could still ask why there is any reality of that dependent kind at all. If this episode is helping you see these questions with greater clarity, take a moment to like this episode, subscribe to the Guided Hour, and share it with someone who may benefit. Your support helps more families discover thoughtful and reliable Islamic storytelling. Now, let us return to the argument. There is another place where Muslims sometimes move too quickly, the Big Bang. You may have heard a sentence like this: scientists discovered the universe began, therefore science proved Allah. That is too simple. Modern cosmology provides extremely strong evidence that the observable universe passed through an extremely hot, dense early state and expanded over cosmic history. Current estimates place that early expansion roughly 13.8 billion years ago. Scientists study cosmic inflation, background radiation, galaxy formation, and the expansion of space. But even NASA openly says that scientists do not know what preceded inflation or what powered it. That is not embarrassing. That is how science works. Science distinguishes what evidence supports from what remains unknown, and our argument should do the same. The Big Bang is fascinating, but we do not need to force it to do theological work it cannot do. If tomorrow a model described a physical phase preceding inflation, our belief should not collapse. We would simply ask about that physical phase. If there were an earlier universe, we would ask about that. If there were a larger cosmos generating universes, we would ask about the larger cosmos. If someone proposed a multiverse, the question would become, why does the multiverse generating structure exist? The waterfall does not depend upon finding the earliest scientific timestamp. It is asking about dependence itself. Now we have reached the second half of our journey. Suppose you find the argument persuasive. You believe there is some necessary, ultimate foundation. You think unity makes more sense than multiple, ultimate, independent gods. You think the foundation cannot be just another dependent physical object. Have we proven Islam? No, not yet. That honesty is important, because several religious traditions believe in something resembling one ultimate God. So now we need another waterfall. Not the waterfall from universe to creator, the waterfall from creator to revelation. First, consider polytheism in its simplest form. Imagine several gods who are all genuinely ultimate. If each is absolutely sovereign and independently able to determine reality, conflict becomes conceptually possible. If one determines that an event must occur and another equally ultimate being determines that it must not occur, what happens? If one can defeat the other, the defeated being is not absolutely sovereign. If neither can overcome the other, each has limits. If they can never disagree because some deeper law prevents disagreement, what is the status of that deeper law? The Quran addresses precisely this kind of problem when it describes the disorder that would follow independent divine rulers. Again, not every form of religious plurality is identical, and we should not pretend that every tradition simply teaches several rival superhumans. But straightforward competing ultimate gods fit poorly with the single necessary foundation toward which our waterfall has been moving. What about identifying God with the universe itself? Some forms of pantheism move in that direction, but now the definition matters. If God simply means the collection of contingent physical things, calling the collection God has not yet explained why the collection exists. A collection of dependent objects does not obviously become non-dependent when we give the collection a sacred name. If, however, someone means by God a deeper necessary reality of which the observable universe is somehow an expression, then the discussion becomes more sophisticated. We cannot refute every version with one sentence, but the Quran draws a clear boundary. Allah is the originator of the heavens and the earth, and nothing is like Him. Creation is not Allah. The universe is not a piece of Allah. Nature is not another name for Allah. There is Creator. There is creation. Do not collapse the categories. Now Christianity. This is where accuracy matters enormously. Christians do not officially say, "We worship three gods." The historic doctrine of the Trinity says there is one God and three divine persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If a Muslim says Christianity simply teaches three separate gods, a knowledgeable Christian can correctly say that we have misrepresented Christian doctrine. So let us represent it properly. Christian theology affirms one divine essence. It also affirms three distinct persons within the one God, and mainstream Christianity identifies Christ as truly divine while also truly human. Islam rejects that description, but notice how the Quran argues. It does not merely count bodies. It emphasizes absolute divine unity, and it refuses divine sonship and plurality within God. The Quran tells the people of the scripture not to say three, and insists that Allah is one God. Another passage points toward the human dependence of Prophet Isa and Maryam by mentioning that they ate food. Why mention eating? Because eating is a sign of dependency. A human body requires nourishment. It receives, it changes, it needs. The Quran deeply honors Prophet Isa. It does not mock him. It identifies him as Messiah and messenger, but it refuses to move him across the creator-creation boundary. The philosophical waterfall we built earlier makes that distinction especially interesting. The necessary foundation does not borrow existence. The necessary foundation is not sustained by food. The necessary foundation is not born from a mother. The necessary foundation is not generated. So Islam's rejection of incarnation and divine sonship fits naturally with its broader doctrine of absolute divine independence. Does that sentence philosophically disprove the Trinity? No. Christian philosophers have developed sophisticated accounts intended to reconcile Trinity and divine simplicity. A serious episode should acknowledge that. Our argument is narrower. The form of absolute, unpartitioned divine unity presented by the Quran maps onto the necessary foundation argument with unusual directness. No incarnation needs to be added. No divine persons need to be distinguished. No divine genealogy exists. Allah is one. Everything else is His creation. Then Judaism enters the conversation, and something different happens. Judaism strongly teaches one God. Its foundational confession says that the Lord is one, so we cannot honestly say the cosmological argument proves Islam instead of Judaism. It does not. At this stage, both Islam and Judaism present strong forms of monotheism. That means our waterfall must continue. The question is no longer simply, is God one? It becomes, has this one God revealed guidance to humanity? If so, where, through whom? And how would we know? This is exactly where Islam makes a fascinating claim. The Quran does not introduce Allah as a new deity who appeared in 7th century Arabia. It tells Muslims to believe in what was revealed to Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Musa, Prophet Isa, and the other prophets. The Quran says revelation came before it. It identifies itself as confirming earlier revelation while also serving as a criterion over what came before. So Islam's claim is not, everyone before Prophet Muhammad worshipped the wrong God, and then a new God arrived. Its claim is almost the opposite. There has always been one creator. Human beings repeatedly received guidance calling them back to that creator. Prophets came to different peoples. The fundamental call was worship of the one true God. And Prophet Muhammad stands inside that prophetic story, not outside it. That is the Islamic claim. Now we must ask whether there is any reason to take it seriously. One place to begin is the Quran itself. Again, not by assuming divine authorship. Treat it temporarily as a historical object. A text appeared in 7th century Arabia connected to the preaching of Prophet Muhammad. That text makes enormous claims. It claims revelation. It claims continuity with earlier prophets. It describes Allah with the kind of uncompromising independence we have already examined. It repeatedly asks people to reason, remember, observe, compare, and reflect. It even asks whether people were created from nothing or created themselves. Then, it challenges its audience to examine the book itself. One verse asks people to reflect upon the Quran and says that if it were from another source, they would find many inconsistencies within it. Another issues a literary challenge concerning producing something comparable to it. A believer understands those as signs. A skeptic is entitled to examine the claims rather than accepting them automatically. That is exactly what an honest investigation should encourage. But before evaluating what a document says, We need confidence about which document we are evaluating. Did the Quran we possess arise centuries after Prophet Muhammad? Or do we have evidence placing Quranic text very early? Here history becomes interesting. One famous example is the Birmingham Quran manuscript. Radiocarbon analysis places the animal skin used for its parchment between the years 568 and 645 of the Common Era, with a probability of 95.4%. That range overlaps the lifetime associated with Prophet Muhammad and extends only shortly beyond it. We need one important qualification. Radiocarbon dating measures the parchment, not the exact date the ink touched it. So we should not say science has dated every written word to a particular year. Nevertheless, the manuscript belongs to very early material evidence for the Quran. Other academic work examining early manuscripts has identified shared spelling patterns consistent with descent from a common written archetype associated with the early standardized Quranic text. Then we have the traditional Muslim historical account. Authenticated reports in Sahih al-Bukhari describe a collection of Quranic material under Abu Bakr after the death of Prophet Muhammad. The reports describe Zayd ibn Thabit gathering written material alongside what was preserved through memorization. Later, under Uthman, reports describe producing standardized written copies in response to disputes in recitation among expanding Muslim communities. This evidence does not automatically prove revelation. A well-preserved human book would still be a human book. But preservation matters because it allows the next question to remain meaningful. If we are going to evaluate whether the Quran could reasonably be revelation, we first need access to something recognizably close to the early Quranic text. The historical evidence gives serious reason to study that question rather than dismissing the book as a much later invention. Now think about what our two waterfalls have done. The first waterfall began with existence. Something exists. Dependent reality exists. Nothing cannot act. Self-creation fails. Merely adding more dependent reality does not obviously provide an ultimate foundation. So the argument moves toward necessary existence. From there, unity and independence become powerful expectations. Then we examine the Quran. 1. Independent, not born, no offspring, nothing comparable. Creator distinct from creation. That is the first convergence. Then the second waterfall begins. If a creator exists, could that creator communicate? If the creator possesses knowledge and will, revelation is at least possible. If revelation is possible, competing claims should be examined. The Quran does not merely say, "Believe because we told you to." It places itself within an earlier prophetic tradition. It claims the God of Prophet Ibrahim, the God of Prophet Musa, the God of Prophet Isa, the God who created humanity itself. It claims that the message continually returned humanity to worship of one creator. Its theological description matches the kind of ultimate foundation toward which our argument had independently moved. Its text is historically early enough to be investigated as an ancient claim rather than a late medieval reconstruction, and its message asks for reflection. Is that mathematical proof? No. Religion is not solved like multiplying 7 by 9. Philosophical premises can be challenged. Historical evidence must be interpreted. Revelation must be evaluated. People can examine the same evidence and disagree. But that does not mean every position is equally strong. Reasoning does not need to produce absolute mathematical certainty before it becomes meaningful. Most of the important judgments human beings make rely on cumulative evidence. You examine several lines. Do they conflict? Do they reinforce one another? Does one explanation make better sense of the total picture? That is the case for Islam we have built today. Not one magic fact, not one scientific headline, not one unexplained miracle claim pulled from a social media video. A waterfall, existence, dependence, necessary reality, unity, independence, creator and creation, revelation, prophetic continuity, Quranic theology, historical transmission. And then the personal responsibility to actually read and investigate. There is something else the waterfall should teach us: humility. Sometimes believers approach these conversations as though the purpose is to destroy another person, win the debate, embarrass the atheist, humiliate the Christian, mock the polytheist. That is not knowledge. If Allah is truth, truth does not need dishonesty as its bodyguard. We should be able to tell a Christian what Christianity actually teaches before criticizing it. We should be able to admit that Judaism also teaches powerful monotheism. We should be able to admit that philosophers disagree about cosmological arguments. We should be able to admit that scientists do not currently know every detail of cosmic origins or the origin of life. And then we should ask whether the case for Allah remains. It does not become weaker because we removed bad arguments. It becomes cleaner. Perhaps the most interesting part of the entire journey is that the Quran itself does not seem frightened of the question. Were you made from nothing? Did you make yourself? Look around. Think. The question is placed in front of the human mind. And once you begin asking it seriously, you discover that who created God is not the end of the conversation. It is the beginning of a better definition. If your God needs a God, you have not reached God yet. If that God needs another God, keep going. If the next one needs another, keep going. Do not stop merely because somebody placed the word God on one of the links in the chain. Follow dependence until dependence ends. The ultimate reality cannot be another borrower. It must be the one upon whom the borrowers ultimately depend. And now listen again to the simple description at the heart of the Quranic conception of Allah. 1. Needed by all, needing none, not born, not producing divine descendants, without equal. Perhaps that is why the argument feels less like discovering an unfamiliar God and more like gradually removing everything God cannot be, not created, not dependent, not divided among rival ultimate powers, not one body inside the cosmos, not nature itself, not born, not sustained by food, not exhausted, not one link in the chain. And when those possibilities fall away, what remains looks remarkably close to Tawheed. But the final question belongs to you, not whether someone on the internet can win a debate, not whether a narrator can make a powerful video. The real question is whether you are willing to follow the waterfall even if it takes you somewhere you did not expect to go. If the universe is dependent, ask what it depends upon. If the answer is another dependent thing, keep asking. If you reach necessary existence, ask what necessary existence must be like. If you reach one creator, ask whether that creator has communicated. If someone claims revelation, examine it, read it, test the claim honestly. And if the evidence begins pointing somewhere, do not stop merely because the conclusion would require something from you. Because perhaps the greatest obstacle to finding truth is not always lack of evidence. Sometimes it is deciding in advance where we refuse to be led. The waterfall begins with the universe, but eventually the question reaches us. What will we do with the possibility that we are not accidents floating inside an unexplained reality? What if existence itself is pointing beyond itself? What if the one at the foundation of everything is not distant from the questions of human life? And what if the book that asks,